Here on Chicago Access Network Television. I'm your host, Andy there, and we're truly privileged today to have Andy Harley, a longtime LGBT journalist who's specialized in covering European issues for many, many years, and has personally been at any number of Eastern European Pride events. And Eastern Europe, for those who may not have been following the issue of late, is of particular interest to LGBT activists today because there's an important election that just happened in Poland and a forthcoming election coming up very soon that could really have a dramatic impact on LGBTs in that country and, for that matter, the region. Andy Harley, welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on Chicago Access Network TV. We're very pleased to have you coming to us all the way from Britain today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Andy and I had the pleasure of participating in a few of the Moscow Pride events in the, that would have been around 2011, 2012, 2013, if I'm getting the years correct. But Andy had been participating in a whole series of demonstrations by LGBT activists, often in illegal circumstances or circumstances where, while what they were doing was totally legal, they were threatened with arrest anyway. Andy, so we've got this important election happening in Poland right now. The President Duda was running for re-election, but didn't get the majority he needed the other week. And so we've got a runoff coming on. Can you tell us a little bit, for those who aren't familiar, what the Polish political situation is like and what this President Duda represents to LGBTs in Poland?
Well, the current president, you said, President Duda, he's from the Law and Justice Party, or the PIS is the abbreviation for it, which is the Polish. And that is a notorious homophobic party in Poland. And if you remember, a few years back, there were what was dubbed the terrible twins, the Kaczynski twins, one of which was the president, and the other was the prime minister. And, you know, during their rule, things were, should we say, quite bad in Poland.
Yes, there's been a lot of attempts to push so-called traditional family values in Poland, and not just with respect to LGBTs, but also women. Attacks on the right to abortion.
Yeah, and you know, currently in the last 6 months or so, a lot of towns and the smaller cities, they've declared LGBT free zones. And you know, it's really shocking what's going on, and this is in, well, 2020, you know, 21st century.
Yeah. Well, and that violates many of the standards that the European Union set up, doesn't it? Or is that sort of a gray area? Because Poland is part of the European Union and supposedly has to uphold certain rights.
That's true. There's two groups in Europe. There's one called the Council of Europe that is made up of, I can't remember how many, 50-something countries, including Belarus, Russia, and other countries that aren't in the other organization, which is the European Union. And that's the one that my country is sadly coming out of.
Yeah.
Now, both organizations have explicit rules on equality and all this sort of thing. And as you've been to Moscow, so you know that this guy that was organizing in Moscow, he had a season ticket to the European Court of Human Rights.
Yes.
Every single pride that was banned, he took it to the European Court of Human Rights and won.
But they always found another way to ban Moscow prides. And before we talk a little bit more about Poland in particular, Andy, could you share with our audience the different countries' pride events that you have had the honor of attending all over Eastern Europe? But I think people need to hear that. What other countries besides Poland have you attended the pride events at?
Well, Moscow. I've been to Hungary. And these are all what I call difficult prides.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's Belgrade, where the first time I went, Pride was cancelled, and it was rightly cancelled because there was serious threats of violence, and it came just after a notorious football match was played in Belgrade, where I think it was a Spanish or French guys were actually killed by the riot. So it's understandable that the first one was first Pride was cancelled. In actual fact, we did have a bit of a pride there. It was in the residence of the Swedish ambassador.
Yes.
And we walked around his garden, with our banners. Mm-hmm. But, it wasn't the same, but at least there was something there. And there were quite a few local people were there, from the gay community in Belgrade. And then the second one was another tear gas pride, and I've been to many where tear gas has been fired.
Were the police firing that at the pride participants or at the right wing?
It's the right wing.
Oh, the right wing was firing.
The right wing fired the tear gas with the police watching.
Yes.
That's the sort of thing that you get in some of these countries now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hungary today is run by a prime minister who is every bit as bad as Duda, and it's a very dangerous situation there for not just LGBTs but particularly immigrants. There is a xenophobic and bigoted theme that has really been promoted, particularly in Poland and Hungary today.
Well, those two are leading countries that the European Union doesn't know what to do about it. They really don't. I mean, they could boot them out. They've got every right to boot them out, but they won't.
Yeah.
So
sort of then makes a mockery of their standing.
What she's saying to the people. Yeah.
I mean, and our audience really needs to understand is as Andy was saying, these are not just your usual Pride events such as we're familiar with in Western Europe or the United States, at least most of the United States. These are situations where people are typically threatened with arrest, threatened with severe violence by neo-fascist forces. One of the prides that Andy and I were at in Moscow, the fascists did attack us physically on right on Red Square, which would be the equivalent in Washington, D.C. of attacking someone right on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial or something, in terms of being just such a public place, and yet they felt like they had impunity to do this in Moscow, and that is unfortunately the situation, particularly when Andy was regularly going to these Pride events in the Baltic countries and so forth, where you were threatened, you and your co-marchers were frequently threatened with violence. Isn't that right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
So,
not just violence, though I suppose you could call it violence, but in Riga, in Latvia, we had to lock ourselves into the hotel where there's a conference, and they had to get a government minister to get a bus to get us all out, and he had to come and order the police to get us out. And we had chicken droppings thrown at us and all this sort of thing. And I mean, eggs are always being thrown at LGBT people in prides.
That would have been about what year, Andy, in Riga? It would have been around 06 or something?
Something like that.
Right.
I think it was the same year as the very first Moscow Pride. I'm getting a bit old and I can't remember dates.
Me too. I did just read that I believe it was something like 140 Moscow Pride activists were recently arrested for standing up for someone who had been arrested in the far east of Russia, and they were all rounded up under again a transparently false pretenses, this time using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse, even though they were presumably all masked and like that. So the travails of our Russian friends continue, as they do in places like Chechnya, which is part of Russia. But shifting the conversation back to Poland, your conversations with Polish activists over the years and other Eastern European LGBT activists, what were some of the things that really struck you as interesting and fascinating, the insights that they had about their situation?
Well, it's fair to say that as individuals, the Polish people are fantastic. They're really friendly and, not good to know. It's just that they are sort of, should we say, led a bit astray by politicians. I think you know about that in America, don't you?
Well, we've got no problems with politicians here.
They believe all this stuff, and of course Poland is a very, very Catholic country.
Yes,
probably the strongest Catholic country in Europe, and I include Italy when I say that.
And in Ireland, yeah.
They've taken over from Ireland, the Irish Republic, which was strongly Catholic, and now in Ireland, you have full-blown same-sex marriage. So, and that was done on a referendum of the people.
And at the same time, I understand that I believe it was the third transgender member of parliament in the world was elected in Poland in 2011. And so, and also the country doesn't have a formal law against homosexual relations, if you will, that say like the United States and Britain and other countries historically have had. They haven't had anything like that since at least the 30s. And so a lot of this isn't even so much a matter of what is the law on the books, but the social attitudes. I mean, same-sex marriage has been essentially made illegal in Poland, but the usual laws against homosexuality have not been there any time in the last
that's
80 years.
Absolutely correct.
One of the things I find interesting is that in some countries, LGBTs seek out alliances with other discriminated groups. In other countries, they don't. The United States, aside from the immediate years after the Stonewall Rebellion, unfortunately, our gay movement has been largely very narrow, only concerned with its own rights and not concerned with others. But with the rise of attacks on immigrants in Eastern Europe, which are like the -- boogeyman, and gypsies and Jews, the activists in Poland that you meant, did some of them express solidarity with other groups besides LGBTs? Were some of them, the activists you met, themselves members of some of those other groups? What was the situation with that?
I got the impression at the time that they were not just campaigning for themselves. They were campaigning for everyone.
That's great.
I went to the first Pride in Krakow, which is university city in the south of Poland. And unfortunately, the Pope died a week before the Pride. So the people in Krakow cancelled the Pride. We got there, and it's interesting because the organisers also had invited, excuse me, a group of Israeli LGBT youth there, and they arrived for the Pride that never was, and so the organisers decided, right, on Pride Day we'd go to Auschwitz. Off we went on 2 buses to Auschwitz, where the authorities in Auschwitz had closed the main part of it, which is the wall of death. They closed that off to the public to let the gays go in. Because you see, the gay men were the only people that are never commemorated on the annual commemoration day in the January.
Okay, this is by the Polish authorities, correct?
Well, one assumes it's the Polish authorities.
Yeah, but the gays were never recognized on that event. Yeah, but those who controlled access to the Auschwitz said that the gays could go in on that day. Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is quite incredible. Although I think it was a local decision.
Yes.
And the decision didn't come from Warsaw.
Yeah.
But
yes,
we all went there, and we had this courtyard, which the Wall of Death is in, all to ourselves for half an hour.
Yeah. Well, and for those who don't know the history, following the opening up of the concentration camps, the LGBTs were the one group of people who did not immediately get recognition from the post-war German authorities, and the compensation that was given to other groups of prisoners, whether they be so-called politicals, people who were members of the Social Democratic or Communist parties, or gypsies, or Jews, of course, and others who had been brutalized by the Nazis. And it took decades to win that recognition in post-war Europe. So whoever was the local authorities there who said that, well, the gays should be allowed to have their recognition of the sufferings of their forefathers and mothers, that was quite a courageous decision on their part.
Yes, I would agree with that totally. It was the big year when there was the big anniversary of the liberation of the camp.
I see.
The concentration camp.
Yeah. Well, and the Polish politics has changed a fair bit since then. I mean, you've had for the last several years we've had right-wing governments, but arguably the economic situation in Poland has given fuel to the rise of right-wing parties, blaming the immigrants, or blaming the gypsies, or blaming the gays for this, that, and the other thing. There's been a huge out-migration of young people from Poland because the economy has historically been so much worse than much of Western Europe where people go to. And I think that, I mean, we see in this country the rise of Trumpism. A lot of it has been, unfortunately, the result of promises made by previous governments to improve people's situations that aren't fulfilled, and so people gravitate to the racism and other bigotry. It's a real pickle, because we need a different alternative, obviously. But
right.
Around 2006, you were in Krakow. Tell us about some of your subsequent trips to Poland.
I think the most vivid memory I have of Warsaw Pride was the first one that was officially sanctioned. Mm-hmm. And we all assembled outside the Parliament building and marched down some side streets. Down the side streets, you had the balconies on the apartment buildings. And just the ordinary Polish people were out on their balconies waving and, mm-hmm. cheering us on. That was an eye-opener, that was.
Yeah.
These are ordinary people, not politicians, ordinary folks. And then a little bit later, we'd marched down the main street in Warsaw, and we just come off it. And as a few of us noticed, there was this very elderly gentleman dressed in his Polish Army World War II uniform that didn't exactly fit him, but he was there, rigid to attention and saluting the parade.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. And for those who don't know, the Polish army was pretty well obliterated during the invasion by first the Germans and then the Russians at the start of World War II, and there were tremendous massacres of certainly the leaders of Polish society after that by both the Russians and the Germans. And for him to come out and to be saluting and breaking against the right wing sort of meme of patriotism means macho, patriotism means that's pretty remarkable.
He was standing there rigidly to attention and I was saluting, and all his wartime medals were glistening in the sunshine. It's an amazing thing. And
About how many people participated in that year's Pride, do you recall? Because I recall it went from a situation of just a few hundred bravely facing down police who were threatening them, and the right wing that were threatening them, to then it was an explosion of many, many, many thousands.
To be honest, yeah, that actual Pride was probably something like 500.
Okay.
And
So
the
it's the years
police
after
were
that.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
The police were there to stop the right wing
Hmm.
from spoiling the parade.
Right.
That's what it's quite amazing, because within 4 years, Warsaw was staging Euro Pride,
Right.
which traditionally is the biggest pride in the whole of Europe.
Right.
Goes from city to city each year.
And that's like hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do recall that. So in the last few minutes that are left to us, because I think what the history that you have unfolded, Andy, shows is that things can change very rapidly from a bad situation to a good situation. And unfortunately, for the last few years, we have seen a relatively good situation deteriorate. That just because the laws say this and so on and so forth doesn't mean that that's what happens. And we've seen women's rights activists, we've seen LGBT activists increasingly harassed in Poland, not supported by the increasingly partisan courts that the ruling. And we've got an election next Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
Sunday, sorry.
Yeah, this coming Sunday.
This coming Sunday, where the runoff between Duda, the current president, and his challenger, the mayor of Moscow.
Warsaw.
Warsaw, I'm sorry. The mayor of Warsaw hasn't been like super out front about supporting LGBT. What's at stake in this election?
And I honestly think it's the future of Poland is at stake. The mayor of Warsaw, he's from the Civic Platform political party, and they are moderates. I mean, Civic Platform opened up gay Warsaw.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they were in power. And I can see no reason. Yes, the LGBT people in Poland do have one or two issues, but with the mayor of Warsaw, because he has actually said in his campaigning that marriage equality is a non-starter.
Sounds like our Democratic politicians
in Poland.
Yeah.
But you can't do everything at once, you know.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say it sounds very much like our Democratic Party politicians in the early part of this century here in the States, where they'd say they're on your side, but
yeah.
Anyway,
things have to ease so slowly.
Yeah. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Okay.
It's truly a pleasure. You know, we owe you so much for your journalism over the decades, and wish you the best in spite of all this COVID-19 mess that both the UK and the United States have made such a mess of. So be safe, and thank you.
I will try, much. And I hope to have a haircut in August.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andy. It's been a pleasure.